Welcome to the Virtual CPA Success Show, where we're 100% focused on helping service-based businesses achieve success. Are you a business owner interested in learning how to scale your business? Has your business reached over $1 million in annual revenue? Then this podcast is for you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. Today, we have a really good topic to discuss. So over our last podcast, we've been really touching the outsides of a lot of topics. We've talked about forecasts, we've talked about metrics, we talked about a lot of things. So now we're going to do some more deep dives on these topics. And we're really excited today to talk about forecasting in more details, but more specifically, forecasting for growth. So today we brought in our one of our trusted CFOs, Tom Waddleton, or as I like to call him, Tommy. So from Ripley, Mr. Ripley, the talented Mr. Ripley movie. So I always say Tommy. So we're joined by Tommy and Jody. So let's start with you, Tom. Before we were in this podcast, we were talking a little bit about a client that you just went through on forecasting. There are some pretty aggressive growth goals. So how did you start that process?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the way the client started the process was looking forward to saying they have a target at the end of 2021, they want to be $30 million in revenue. And they backed that up and said for investment reasons, company valuation, that's where they set. Then they came back and said, we're at 2019, we're getting around 10. So let's set the target of $20 million in 2020. So 100% growth and then 50% growth after that. So that was the very beginning of the conversation from them. And from then we started into the forecast process.
So when they said they want to double in 1 year, what is your thought?
So I had only worked with them for a little while. So it really surprised me because they had not hit any of their sales targets for 2019. And Luckily the CEO, before I said it, had said to me, I know this seems kind of crazy because as you've joined us, we've missed all of our targets and this is what we're going to go for next year.
So this like really intrigues me a lot because, you get that a lot where people have this pie in the sky. Hey, I want to grow $1 billion. Mm-hmm. If I put pen and paper together, it's automatically going to happen. Obviously, right. That's the first part of it. That's the catalyst, right? Putting pen and paper, getting that plan together. But what do you do? I mean, after they put the pen and paper, what's your thought process after that?
It's a really good question. So the very first thing I suggested to him was let's have a high-level plan that your leadership team can gather around, because he admitted that the leadership team didn't completely believe in their sales targets before. So the first step then we talked about with him before we got the team together was let's look at your sales capability because you've been missing targets and you're telling me it's not because your team can't produce, it's because you're not getting sales done. So then we started talking about the capability, their ability to close work and get things done. And some of that came into one of the people they felt like was in the wrong seat, that the person they've had lead the company so far, they didn't believe was in the right seat. So that started discussion about sales capability and that kind of piece. And we can talk a little bit more about kind of where that led. But that was the beginning of the conversation was what's your ability to actually go out and get this work?
So they were good at self-identifying that, hey, they really didn't have the right people in the right places in order to double their sales. Otherwise, they'd have been doubling it year after year before that, right? Unless there was just one big fish out there that they knew they're going to land that was going to get, the majority of that increase. So
right, yeah,
they
that's completely
self-identified.
True.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so we talked about that investment, but that's where we started. Also, when we talked about sales, so they break their work into design work, engineering work, and product work. So we looked at each of those amounts of revenue and how they had been changing and then talked about, okay, so if we're going to set this goal, where do you think the growth is going to come from? And it was interesting because engineering is the biggest part of their business right now. And they saw a lot of growth there. They saw the biggest growth in product where they admitted that they build products, but for the most part, they're making almost no revenue. So it's how do you turn that into revenue? Mm-hmm. And the other piece was a huge amount in design. They do some upfront design work, really cheap to try to get the engineering work, and they believe they can start charging. So those are the areas that are growing much more than 100% to try to build it up. But then engineering being so big, it had to also continue to grow quite a bit. So the beginning of the conversation really dealt around, can you actually get this work and where would the work come from to do that? And then somewhere on the sales side.
So that's a great starting point. So you talk about the sales team, you talk about the sales process. Now, did that eventually lead to sales forecasting and say, okay, if we're going to hit this number, if we're going to grow to this amount, this is the size sales team we need, or was it just about shifting seats as well?
No, it did get to the size sales team. So 3 months later, they have hired a new VP of sales. And part of our forecast process was then him building out a staff. And so he came back and said, here are capabilities. He hired a consultant to help him build and use the pipeline tool. And so they had a pipeline, but as we started trying to dig into the pipeline, they very quickly admitted they weren't good at keeping it up to date. So it was really hard to look at the pipeline of work and see if they had enough. So this consultant is coming in, he's actually in process now saying, here's the information you need to capture. And this salesperson has helped them grow a different company close to that amount. And so they felt like he had the experience. And then he came in and said, here's what my team needs to look like. And he also took 2 people in the existing sales team and moved them into different roles outside sales. So he also looked at capabilities and said, get the right people on the right bus, including putting some people in place and then pushing some people out of where they were.
So I think that's definitely a great place to start, and especially with a company that's looking for aggressive growth. But Jody, what are your thoughts? What if a company, instead of looking for this aggressive growth, is just looking for more of a natural growth, maybe a 20% growth? Is sales still the right place to start?
I'm kind of torn between that one. I think the process is the first thing to start. Hey, what kind of, what are we actually built to do? Are we a recurring revenue model based, company, or are we a hey, you got to hunt and kill everything that you find, and then next year you got to replace your entire sales thing. So I think it's really depends on the type of sales you are. If you're replacing, then yeah, you need to continue looking at your sales funnel. You continue building it up so it's big enough to win, 20% of those out there, 30%, something like that. If it's a reoccurring revenue model, I think you're a little easier on the growth because you're going to have your base already. You might lose 5% attrition from your base, but for the most part, you're going to have your base. And as long as you can continue to perform well for the existing clients, that attrition should be low. And then you're really just looking for growth. How much do we need to add to that in order to get that 20%, 30%, 50% growth, or in Tom's case, 100% growth? A lot easier in a recurring revenue model than it is to go out and find that type of growth, unless you're looking for that big whale out there. If you've got the big whale that is going to get you to that 50% growth, well, that's a possibility. There's a huge risk. You might get started in that big whale and something might happen, might get over your head a little bit, or something might happen which you're going to get kind of stuck. So that's a risky thing to do if you're looking for that one big big thing out there. But I would say recurring revenue is real easy. I mean, not real easy, but it's easier to grow at that 20% rate. But it all begins with the processes, and then from the processes, you're building your forecast, right? So you're looking not only at the next 3 weeks, cash flow. You're looking at 12 months. You're looking at a year, 2 years, 3 years, or in our case, we look all the way up to 10 years. So we're pretty confident based on our trajectory where we're going to be at in a 10-year period. Now, we're not going to obviously hit exactly that number, but we're going to be really close, because we know what the trajectory is. We know what we have to do now to generate that base in order to do that. And so, if you're looking for that 20% growth, I think you have to, first of all, look at processes in place. What type of company are you built for? And then kind of build onto that model, put it to pen and paper, like Tom was mentioning earlier. And then from there, it's just simply executing. How many, sales calls do I have to have in order to, get the, 3 clients that we're going to get out of it? What's our closing ratio? How long does it take to close a deal? How big are the deal? How big of the deals are we looking at? Are we looking at a lot of small ones where it's going to take a lot more pipeline? Or are we looking at, bigger deals, which it's not going to take as much, but they're going to take a little bit longer to, to close the cycle. So there's a lot of things you're looking for through that whole cycle once you've actually put the pen and paper together.
And I think the process you talked about, and we talked obviously about what your sales size needs to be, but I think kind of to go with process is also strategy. And I think if you're going to have any kind of sales strategy, you need to understand what works and what doesn't work. I think that's really important going into that sales conversation to think about. In the past, do you know your numbers? Do you know what where you sell better? Do you sell better when you go and do speaking events? Do you sell better to recurring clients? Do you sell better to certain industries? And I think really understanding that strategy and being able to have that conversation, it's great to have just a talk. We can talk all we want, but it's great to have some numbers behind it and be like, that way you can always look at it and say, oh, actually our recurring clients come back 90% of the time. Maybe we should focus on that. Maybe we should focus on getting a couple of more big fish in here and just holding on to them, or those type of discussions, and having those numbers behind that makes it really helpful.
Sure, without a doubt. I mean, that's key. Understanding what's under the hood. That's kind of where it starts. I mean, you have to have that understanding. And if you're just flying blind, it's really risky to grow.
Yep.
It really is.
And I'll admit, for this particular client, we were a little bit blind that their sales capabilities I mentioned was a bit lacking. So Jamie, a lot of the numbers you talked about were difficult to get. And so it was more of we need to get someone in here and build the capability to do it. But it was definitely one of the risks that we saw as you're trying to grow and sort of where in the numbers, but you don't know exactly where that's going to come from and which customers you count on. Do you need a couple more $1 million customers and that'll get you there? Or is it a bunch of really small ones? That kind of stuff was difficult in this particular case.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing is difficult is that you really don't know how much cash you're going to need too, because growth requires cash because there's going to be a certain lag before the efforts actually result in money coming in the bank. And so you need to know really what that lag is going to be. Is it going to be 3 months worth of cash? Is it going to be 4 months? If we're looking at doubling our size, there's a pretty significant lag there between,
yes,
how much money you got to put into this, this wheel to get it going. Then what's going to happen unless you just completely get lucky. And if you're lucky, then that's great. But I wouldn't be planning on luck for sure. I got to plan for that for sure. Because you don't want to get in 3 months and then think, oh no, now where's all my money at? Because I just invested in another marketing person. I've got all the spending money out there. I've added a couple more team members anticipating this growth, and it doesn't happen.
Yes.
That could put you in a bad situation for sure.
Yeah. And we've talked before about the importance of an operating reserve. And this particular client has more than a 10% of their trailing 12 months revenue operating reserve. And so we'd said, we'll dip into that. But you guys are in a really good financial position that you can do that. They do a lot of billing to clients up front. And so that helps their cash position. But they know when they grow, they may not be able to continue doing that. So they can lean pretty heavily on that. And that does give them a lot of room to take this risk to grow, for example, the sales team that is going to take a little while to build up that pipeline.
And I think that's a great thought. And I think a lot of times we talk about cash reserve and we talk about the 10 to 30%. A lot of companies, will take that with a grain of salt. Like, yeah, we'll get there eventually. But I think once you want to do something like grow, it gives you opportunity to say, hey, we can grow. Let's put this growth plan in place, but let's wait 6 months. Let's wait till you have your cash reserve in place. And then you can get the whole team on board, right? You can go to your sales team and be like, yeah, we can grow, but in order to do it, we need to get more cash in the bank so we can do it, because a 10% cash reserve goal probably isn't going to cut it when you're looking for growth. You probably need to bump that up to 15, 20% in case it doesn't happen. Because if you really want to grow, you want to be all in on that growth. You don't want to be in on that growth for 3 months and then you're out of cash. You're like, all right, I guess that plan didn't work. You can't really, 3 months probably isn't enough time. So
sure. That's a great point. And this company has 4 owners. And so them taking distributions was a decision to build up that cash reserve. So it's the kind of thing you could do of saying, you've got some cash, do you pull it out or leave it in and bet big, which is what 100%. They're choosing to do.
It's an investment. It's 100% an investment in your company. And that's what a lot of people don't think about. They think about investments as in stocks or as in, putting money in a mutual fund. But if you're willing to grow your company, you keep that cash in there as an investment to make that company worth more. So it's definitely a great point. So
yeah, and when you say you keep the cash in there, you're really actually buying employees, right? So 100%. You're buying.
Yeah,
that's what you're typically doing with the cash. So it's not like it sits there forever and ever and ever and grows. Yeah. You're buying it and building more of a machine, so that the value overall is the value of what the machine can produce, not the individual components of it.
Yeah, right, 100%. Right. So Tom, once you've established that, okay, we're going to have the sales team in place, we're going to have everything we need in order to grow this company. What are the next steps you take? What do you have to look at?
Yeah. So the next thing for me was the really fun part. So it's saying, do they have the production?
Wait. Accounting and fun?
I know.
Okay. I just want to clarify that.
So you hear that, Jamie? You can judge toward the end if I'm correct.
Okay, Tom, go ahead.
So now the next piece is, do they have their production capacity to do this kind of work? Right. And so we do pretty detailed models where you're saying, okay, on a per person basis, how many hours do they bill in a week and what's their billing rate for that? Are there write downs? And so we have that information, with the goal being getting the entire team on board with this massive growth. The approach I took was not to go out and say, hey, what would your plans be if we tried to grow huge, and tell me by person what you need. We put together a really simple model with a few variables where it showed a calendar year across the columns, and a few variables like how many resources, how many hours will they bill per week, what would their billing rate be, and what would your write downs be. If I have that, then I can say, how much work can I expect to produce? I also had the conversation with the owner about, and it's kind of obvious, but okay, if you look at $20 million over 12 months, that's an average of 1.7 million a month. But you're not going to jump from 800,000 this year to 1.7 immediately. So we came up with a sloped growth that ended the year at $2.6 million, so way above that average, but it started about $1 million. So given that, I could, without any of the production team's input, saying, given your current variables, here's how many people you need to add to do this. the first step we looked at is, okay, is this billable hours expectation? Will that continue? And is that reasonable? And had some good conversation about what they would do and what if they had a bench of people of 10% to grow that, what would that do to their hours? And we adjusted for that. And then we had a really good conversation about billing rate. This is what you're able to bill today. If you grow this fast, do you expect that billing rate to go down, for example, because you're being aggressive just to get the growth? And if it's so, let's go ahead and make sure we build that piece in. And then what about write downs? The same kind of conversation if you're throwing this at it. It was a really valuable conversation where we made a bunch of changes to it. And ultimately, we came up and said they thought they needed to add as much as 180 people to their team to do this kind of a growth, which is huge. That's more than double the size of the production team.
Wow.
And even to the point
Just
where they do
that kills me.
they do some work offshore where they said, we can't find that many resources in this country because we're already feeling maxed out. And they were starting in a second country and said, let's put most of the growth there. So it got into several really good conversations about size of space and number of teams and all that stuff. But we walked away after a couple conversations with the team saying, okay, I think this is right sized from how many people it is in total and where they should be. And then the next step was getting to more detail after that. But that's where that piece started.
No, I think you had a great point there. And I think you kind of hit on four levers, right? Four levers of your growth is one, your existing people, right? You could push your existing people more hours. Two is hire new people. That's obviously going to help you get more hours in pretty quick turns on it. And then also average bill rate. You could charge more to your clients. And I think the fourth area you touched on was we could write off less. And so I think, just to have those four levers at your disposal is huge. And I think when you're going through a growth plan, you're probably going to have to touch each of them, right? You can't just say, we're only going to do this through write downs, or maybe you could, but that'd be a pretty amazing growth through not write downs. But usually it takes a little bit of all four of those to actually make it work. And sometimes it's in waves too. Sometimes you start by pushing on your current employees, have them work a little more, and then, start charging more. And just a lot of times it comes in waves as well. So.
Yeah, because when I look at that, I look at the three different tools. There's always three different things levers you can pull in a company. One is the tools that you're using. Another is the people you're using, and then processes. And so I think in order to grow like what you're talking about there, you've got to have a really good, solid foundation in all three of those. Do we have the right people, like Tom had mentioned, not only on the right on the bus, but in the right seats on the bus, like Jim Collins had mentioned.
Yep.
Do we have the tools that's going to allow us to get there quicker, faster, more efficient? Or are we using something archaic that's taking 3 times as long for somebody to do and not maybe getting the quality? So we're always looking at the tools and then the processes. You mentioned the offshore team. Do we have the processes in place in order to be able to manage that offshore team? Because there comes a lot of variables, a lot of unknowns when it comes to an offshore team than when it has a person sitting next to you at the desk to you. And that could be not even an offshore team. That could be a distributed team. It could be that you're used to having everybody in your office here. Now you hire 10 people that are in a different state or whatever. Do we have the processes, tools, and right people to be able to manage that whole thing? Because if not, you're spending a lot of money and you're just going to be throwing it right out the door. And so it's one of those things I think, you have to understand. If you have all three of those things working for you, that's when everything works really well. And that's when you're going to have that high growth, and the growth is going to be profitable. It's not going to just be growth for growth's sake. You're not trying to increase your top line revenue. Your bottom line revenue bottom line net income better be increasing at that same slope or better. That's the whole idea for growth in the first place.
I couldn't agree more, Jody. And just one example of what you had said is the way that they assign work in their project tool currently is very sort of people-based because they have a small team and it's easy to tell people what they're going to do. And they admitted with this kind of growth, they can't continue to manage that. So they talked about investment in an actual project management tool to assign work and track what people are working on and things, because they admitted it would get out of control with that kind of growth. And that was just one example, but we had a pretty good conversation about what process and tools would have to change if you're suddenly a really big company operating in 2 countries where you're currently just in one, where sort of everyone can look across the room and see each other in that same room.
Mm-hmm. And Jamie, I think we've had the same issue internally, 100%. Having 12 individuals. Well, of course, we're obviously distributed. So we have like 40 plus people all throughout the US. And then we've got another 12 individuals in Indonesia and India. And so managing those folks, Jamie, you've had that you've been tasked with that for a long time. Kind of tell us like your pains and struggles with that, because that's part of our growth process.
Mm-hmm.
We want to grow big too, so how do you manage that, Jamie?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and it's exactly kind of what you were talking about with tools and processes, and then we talk about this with our clients all the time, is the more you grow, the more overhead costs you need. And especially when it comes to this area, like, I think when we initially brought on the India team, it was like, oh, all we need to do is have our seniors go in, and they can handle the project management. They can move stuff over, but there needs to be a match. There needs to be something to ignite moving stuff over, because people aren't going to do it on their own. And so that's where obviously my role came in. I was a CFO. I've moved into this role now where more I'm a director, because you need someone to run the process and make sure it's happening and making sure the ball is moving. And obviously taking me off the board as a revenue earner and putting me in overhead was a conscious decision as part of our growth. And again, that's something that's going to happen as the bigger you get. And so that's what I've noticed the most with us moving stuff to India, is you really, really, really have to like constantly be looking at the process. You take your eye off the ball for 2 weeks, I guarantee nothing's going to happen during those 2 weeks. Nothing's going to move forward. Mm-hmm. Things don't move without someone pushing it along. And so I think that's the biggest thing is, and we see that all the time. We see that with every one of our clients, is the bigger you get, there are those certain thresholds where you're like, yeah, I can't do this anymore as the CEO. We need a COO, or we need even a director below that COO to push things forward. And that's the hardest part of growth is you're used to operating at a certain size, and you don't think that your overhead costs are going to grow with you, and they always do.
Yeah, because I think a lot of that is that, we as individuals, we do a lot of things ourselves that maybe somebody else should be doing. And when we're smaller, whether that smaller means 60 people, 100 people, or just 3 or 4 people, a lot of times we're doing a lot that we should be passing down. And until we actually feel pain, we're going to keep doing it.
Sure.
It's going to happen. We're going to do it. It's real easy. Why would I have to change? I don't care if there's somebody below me that could do it quicker, faster. It's going to take me time to figure it out. It's going to take me time to show that person how to do it. You know what? That person's going to screw up every time I do it anyways. And eventually they might get it right. But, I don't have the time. And so it comes down to the pain. I don't have the time right now. Well, I'm not going to have the time tomorrow when I have 3 more responsibilities to do or 10 more responsibilities to do. So I've got to make the time. And so what does that mean, making time? Because you just can't create time, right? I mean, time is one of those things that's pretty static. But what it means that you've got to figure out, what can I sacrifice this week in order to get this achieved, so that it's going to save me a bunch of time down the road.
Right.
100%.
Can I combine a couple meetings this week? Can I get somebody to help me with this one project so that I can work with this team to really develop it? Because I truly have control over my own time. If you think you don't have control over your time, you're dead wrong. You truly have control of your time. If something were to happen tomorrow, let's say somebody really significant to you passed away tomorrow, and you would find a time to go to the funeral. You'd find time to go to that person, to take time and grieve. Mm-hmm. You'd probably take a week, 2 weeks, maybe in some cases, just to kind of clear your mind. Why can't you do that for just something as simple as, hey, I need to take time off my plate today. I need to figure out how to increase it. And so that's the process that Jamie's talking about, that people, even though you need them to delegate, they don't, because they don't have control of their time, because they just don't know how to manage their time. They don't know how to create the sacrifice in order to do it. It doesn't mean working a bazillion hours. That's not what that means.
Right. It
just means shuffling things around temporarily so that you can accomplish something more long-term. And that's one of the biggest parts of the growth I think any company is going to experience, is just 100%. Simply how to delegate, and how to get your team to delegate, how to get your team to empower them so they can push things down, not abdicate it, not move it to somebody and then just forget about it and walk away, but move it to somebody where you can actually review it, make sure it's done properly at the quality standards that your company has. That's the key there. And so that when we do the offshoring to somebody outside of the company, whether again it's out, to another state or to another country, it gets even more difficult because they don't see them. They become a non-person to a lot of people. That person in Alaska, it's a non-person. It's really a person, but it's a non-person because I don't feel, touch, and see that person all the time. And so it becomes a distant thing, it becomes like an afterthought. And so the key is getting those people to be more real. And video conferencing is a great way of doing it. Getting them on, doing video, making sure that everybody's communicating the same way, they can see that person, getting together maybe in huddles, maybe once a quarter or whatever it is, so they can get together as a group to meet in the event, that bring them to your office. However you're going to do that with an offshore team, you better at least go over and introduce yourself to those folks, maybe bring them over. So again, they're a part of the team, again, a real person, not just simply an afterthought that somebody can just kind of push aside, not on purpose. That everybody does it. It's just one of those things that you have to make sure you control.
Hearing you describe that, Jody, makes me think of what I thought was a fairly innovative approach for the CEO to try to get everyone to buy into to this. So like I said, we went through this model and got them to agree. Jamie, to your point, the levers were really important where we could show if we don't bill at this rate, look how big the impact is when you're multiplying times these really big number of hours. If we can get average billing rate up $10, down $10. Once everyone bought in, we said, okay, in a short amount of time, we need all the detail for these 180 people. And the CEO decided, to your point, Jody, to have everyone in the same place for a full week for a leadership retreat and do all of this planning. They actually invited me to attend. It was down in South America, and I had a personal conflict that I couldn't go, but it would have been a great opportunity to work with that team, but I'll do it in the future.
Could have invited me.
They could have.
Invite me
yes.
next time.
I will go next time, I promise. But they did this for the week. And so I gave them the assignment of then by role, by date, who are you going to put in and what's their salary? And so they came back with all those names, and we had a work stream for all the administrative people and the sales people, but then the production team. And so we got that back in, and that allowed me to say, okay, let me plug that into the forecast and actually show you what the result is. So now we've moved from our simple model into our actual forecast model. And a few things came in differently where they added some different resources. They changed some of the billing. And so we worked through that. But that started to give us a really good detailed forecast. Got them on board. So it was another meeting where they locked in on that. And then the next step of the process to do a more detailed forecast to say, okay, what else changes? Simple things like rent is going to go up if you're going to add this many people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sales and marketing expense is going to go up. And so we started plugging in those kind of things. And then we've got benchmarks of the industry of what should people be spending, 10 to 15% on sales and marketing. So now we can compare back to that and say, are we within that? We were actually pretty light on that and looked and said, interesting that we're way below the industry and what we think we're going to spend on sales and marketing, yet we're trying to way outgrow what people are doing. So it caused us to invest a significant amount more in sales and marketing as a result. But that was sort of the good next step to say, okay, we think we're figuring out sales. We got the right number of resources. Let's build a detailed forecast that then supports that we can measure against.
That's great. So I'm going to take a real quick break here and talk about our email address. So, this show, we want to make sure that the listeners are getting involved and we're hitting on all the right topics. So if you have any ideas for us, feel free to email us at vcfo@summitcpa.net. Again, vcfo@summitcpa.net. Again, if you want to be a guest on the show, if you want to have a topic for us, please email us and let us know. We're always looking to make the show evolve. So we have a couple minutes left here, and I really want to hit on one more topic with this, Tom. So I think I love what your team did. It sounds really good that they got the team involved, and I think you get that excitement. It's a really big deal. Once time people are excited about it, they're going to be willing to do a lot more to grow the company forward. So my question is how do we talk about budgets versus forecast all the time. And obviously you've built a budget for this team of how to get to this number. What are you going to do if 6 months in the revenue numbers that you came up with by month were hitting low? Like, how do you create this moving target to make sure people still stay excited about it?
That's a great point. So our forecast, so we have the plan for the year that is, we actually came up with about $21 million is our forecast. Each month, of course, we do a financial statement review, and then we're also going through and modifying the forecast each month. One of the challenges we have, but I've seen it in lots of different clients, is in the short term, our pipeline isn't so good, but if you look out a couple months, it's really, really good. And so there's there's an element that we can talk more about sort of how do you say, okay, is it really good in the future? Or are you just like sort of pushing off a difficult decision? But then there's a side of saying, then we shouldn't be hiring as many people as you thought you were during this time period, because let's not spend the money if we don't have the work to do. And so it's changing that forecast. Once you start plugging the actuals, so now we've got the first month of January to say, okay, is our run rate really still $21 million? Or since we underperformed, do we think we're going to grow more at the end of the year to make up for that? And those are the two decisions they have to make is, okay, are we now a $20 million company and we're saying that's good enough? Or are they saying, no, we still want 21, which means we have to grow even more in the fourth quarter, and can we build the capacity more? So that ongoing forecast is really important. And to your point, Jamie, if you change it, then you can still keep the motivation of the team up, because now they're saying, okay, we are meeting the forecast in the future, versus maybe an entire year of, once again, we missed that original plan, and that could carry on every single month and be very demotivating for the team.
For sure. No, I think the biggest thing here with me is if you look at it as a set period of time, that's where it gets dangerous. Like if you're saying in 2020, we want 2020 to be our $20 million year. Obviously, as every month goes by, that you get less time to catch up there.
Yes.
Time does go away eventually. So right. And January is over, fine. We didn't hit our targets. We have 11 months to make it up. Now we have 10 months to make it up. Now we have 9 months to make it up. At some point, it's going to become impossible to make it up. And so I think it's to keep your company moving and constantly thinking about, okay, eventually we're going to be a $20 million a year company, and just make sure that goal is in place. Because at some point, people are going to be extremely disappointed if like July, they're like, we're still going to be a $20 million company. It means hitting $4 million of revenue a month for the next 4 months. It's just, it's very hard to do. And so making sure that you're constantly reevaluating that. And oftentimes what happens is the team had great success. They grew to 18 million. Their profits grew. They had all this success, but all the leadership team is disappointed because they didn't hit that 21 million. And it's like, well, look what you guys did. And we're on track for 20 million this year. We're on track for 25 million this year. So it's making sure that you are always looking at those goals outside of just that fixed period.
Yeah. Now, I do have a question for you, because I'm struggling with one thing right now to how to provide a service. In the past, in this foreign country, everyone got the approval for the one leader if they wanted to hire each individual person, which makes sense when you're small. Now you're going quickly, and they're trying to give these people a lot of power. What they're afraid of is people will go out and hire too big of a team. And I'm trying to help them with a fairly simple solution to say, when is it okay to hire? If we're hitting all the sales targets, it's pretty obvious, but it's a combination of watching the pipeline and what work is coming in and what you need to kind of balance that stuff. So I'd be interested in what your thoughts are for different clients of how have you tried to do that simply so people feel like they're empowered and make the right decisions?
Question for you on that is, are these people all being paid the same wages as everyone else? Are they getting a lower wage than everyone else, or are they equal to everybody else in the company?
The leaders?
No, the people that we're hiring. Is that what you're asking? The hiring?
Yes. Yes. How do you make the decision? They're making about the same wage. It's fairly low wage since it's a foreign country.
Okay, so it's not like they're making $60,000 in the United States and $5,000 in somewhere else.
Sorry,
it's not.
Almost all the resources are in the other country, and they're probably making about $20,000 a year. So we don't
significantly less.
It is less, yes.
Okay. So the risk is not as big,
right?
Is what
True.
I guess is what it's coming down to. Okay, Jamie, go for it.
Yeah, no, I definitely what I've done in this situation is you create approval processes that are pre-approved, right? So you talk about, you have your budgeting meeting and you say, okay, for this, we know where we're at this month. We can, since we're doing forecasting and we're doing pipeline, we kind of know what the next 3 months look like. So you can give them a quantity. You can say, okay, you can hire X number of people this month, or these are the numbers that we can do with you, giving you that latitude to make those choices. And then if they do anything outside of that, just creating a very efficient approval process that goes up through the ranks, right? So like, okay, I've hired my 4 people. I really need my 5th. I've only been approved for 4 this month. By the time that happens, they're probably already almost to that next approval period anyways. And if they're not, just having a chain that they can go up and having a very quick process they can go up, whether it's a Google Sheet, purchasing a software or something where they can make sure that approval happens and gets to the decision makers. And again, the decision maker might not be the CEO. It might be the manager. It might be a director or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be the CEO. It has to be someone that understands the numbers and understands what that one additional head is going to do for that month. That's how I've dealt with it in the past.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to make sure that they've got a solid hiring manager in place. It can't be just anybody deciding who's going to come on. I think they've got to go through a solid interviewing process,
100%.
No matter who that person is. Because the longer, what happens is a lot of times you hire all these people because you need these bodies in place, and you find out half of them aren't even a good fit for the company. And then now what? Now you've got all these issues. Against people, processes, and tools are the 3 things. And so it's important to have that in process. And if you've got a solid hiring manager in place, constantly interviewing these people, because it's going to be a constant thing, right? You're growing pretty fast. It's going to be inevitable that they're not going to be able to find 10 people to start right away. It'll be a process, and so it's more of a process. Hey, we've got this great candidate. When we pull the trigger, well, we need to get 2 more clients before we can do that. Okay, great. We know what that is. We can give that candidate, hey, it looks like about 2 to 4 weeks out, and you kind of continue to keep the ball moving along. So I think the hiring process is really a key focus there that a lot of people get mixed up in. They think, oh, I need bodies in here, and yeah, they do, but they need the right bodies in there. Otherwise, they're going to have they're going to regret it big time.
I really like that. I'm not sure I focus enough on that, but thinking of that, you could probably easily say if you don't hire the right people and onboard them to get your 180 people, you might have to hire 250. That's overwhelming to think of that many people coming in and going and things, where you could have fixed that up front by saying, if we get the right people, it could be a matter of 10, 20, 30, 40 less people that you're hiring, maybe more than that, to get
100%.
because you got the right people coming on the bus.
And look at all the money. Look at all the money you wasted hiring 30 to 40 more people.
Yes,
ton of wasted money.
Yeah, definitely.
And that goes right to the bottom line and out the door.
Right,
for sure.
That's that's a good point, Tom.
Yeah,
sure.
No, I definitely agree with the hiring manager. And like I said, I think the last point here, just to nail it home, and it's kind of to what I said, is when you're in a growth mode like this, looking at your forecast very frequently is very important, because you want to make sure you're updating it. You want to make sure you're talking about it. You want to make sure you have a plan every month of what the next month's going to look like. Because if you really are growing that quickly, you need to have, everybody needs to know what their steps are to make that growth happen. So
sure.
I think that's super important there.
Yeah. And, I'm sure we can make the point that even if you're not growing, if you're trying to stay about the same size, all of these points are still there. They're magnified when you're trying to grow like crazy, but all of the, where do your sales come from? Do you have the right resources, the right people on the bus? All of those things are important decisions just to continue having a successful business. If you're out there saying, but I want to stay about the same size, I think it's almost just as important.
Awesome.
Gotcha. I agree.
Well, I think this was a very helpful podcast, and hopefully the listeners enjoyed it. And again, feel free to email us if you have any additional questions. And I want to thank Tommy, and Jody for joining us today. And I think it was a great show. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Enjoy this episode? Visit our website at summitcpa.net to get more tips and strategies for achieving virtual CPA success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.